Welcome back to the show. Zach is back today. We missed you yesterday, Zach. How you doing? How you feeling? So listen, Zach, yesterday the episode was like, 15 minutes, 20 minutes long. It was so quick. You know, I need someone to bounce ideas off of, man. So I'm glad you're back today.
And you didn't have anybody to fight you on your terrible rankings. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going to say that.
Agreed. I don't like an echo chamber. So
right. Yeah,
that's what I felt like.
I've been there before. I know exactly what you're talking about.
All right, so we're talking week 3 wide receivers in this episode, where we have them ranked, their matchups, the schemes that they're going up against, and a lot more. All right, let's move on to wide receivers. Let's talk about the top guys this week. CeeDee Lamb up at the top, obviously. I think he has a bigger game this week. Very tough matchup against the Browns in Cleveland last week. They're at home this week. Should be a better game. Also, the Saints ran single high coverage at the 5th highest rate last week, and CeeDee had the 4th highest yards per route run against single high coverage last year. So there's a good chance at a blow-up game here. I'm expecting them to look like Dak and CeeDee once again.
Right, and not to mention the home and away splits for the Cowboys last season were pretty hilarious. You know, Lamb, he averaged 28.9 points per game at home and 19.4 points per game on the road. We saw that kind of last week against the Browns. It was a tough matchup on the road. CeeDee still came through. He had 13 points in PPR, which was all right, but we expect that upside, that ceiling, to be there this week, even against the Saints. He won't be running against Marshawn Lattimore all day because he's going to be playing out of the slot. Marshawn Lattimore isn't going to shadow him, I don't think. And the game has a much better 46.5 point total than last week. Dallas was I think it was a 41.5 point total, something like that. Dallas's implied total is also sitting at 26. That's a whole touchdown better than they had last week at 19. So I think this offense at home, they'll get rolling. CeeDee Lamb will be cooking again. I think, like you mentioned, we're going to see them get back to it. But the Saints, still not a horrific defense. We're going to learn a little bit here about how good the Saints are actually, because they absolutely doghoused the Panthers last week. And we'll see what happens against a better offense, whether they can hold their own or not. But I do think either way, Dallas is going to have their way.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, man. I mean, listen, the Saints ran the most motion last week, and they did a lot of good things, a lot of play action. Like, this is just what you want to see, you know, from these offenses. The best offenses do that. So
right.
The Saints offense, like, you know, I'm expecting them to do big things, and that's one of the reasons why I'm not so worried about Chris Olave. I said big things. I don't know about big things, bigger things than last year. How's that? I don't know about big things because Derek Carr's still their quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Bigger.
There we go. There's the Derek Carr shade. We've been waiting for that. Like every week, we're just gonna put that in somewhere into the episode. It's
amazing. Exactly.
That's what we do.
Zach, I have Cooper Kupp at 3 this week. Okay.
Yeah.
The Bills attacked the middle of the field a ton last week against the Cardinals. They gave up the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers lining up out of the slot last week. Khalil Shakir ended up catching that touchdown out of the slot. No Puka Nacua. 14 catches on 21 targets last week. A little hard to ignore, man. Like, am I crazy for ranking him this high? I have him above Amon-Ra, who I have at 4 against Tampa, and then above A.J. Brown against Justin Jefferson, etc. Am I crazy here?
No. See, I was having the exact same thought when I put Cooper Kupp. I also have him at 3, which is hilarious because I was like, Amon-Ra St. Brown, they're playing the Bucs. Like, this is a great matchup. And I think I would have Amon-Ra St. Brown over Kupp if Jameson Williams wasn't suddenly a thing this season. But when he runs a 94% route participation, gets a 30% target share, Jameson Williams, I can't have Amon-Ra over the guy that had more receptions than any other receiver had targets last week, and that's Cooper Kupp. So Cooper Kupp's at 3. And I'm also going to put this out there. I was big on Puka Nacua coming into the season. This isn't me being wrong about Puka. Puka got injured. This is Cooper Kupp going back.
Zach is defending his Puka take right now. It's okay, man. It's okay, man. Listen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Nobody's taking shots at you, man. Not yet. Don't worry. It's an injury.
I can hear it though, because this is the thing. To shift like Cooper Kupp, he was a low wide receiver 2 in my rankings last week, and to have him jump up all the way to number 3, I feel like that deserves a little bit of an argument, just a little justification here. You know what I'm saying? But
yeah,
we saw 2021 Cooper Kupp rebirth last week. So it's like you can't ignore that. You look at the matchup that they have. The Cardinals are such a good matchup. It's just going to be excellent. And what's also great for Cooper Kupp is the Cardinals are able to keep up with teams on offense. They're not going to get steamrolled. They kept up with the Bills last week. So I don't think it's going to change. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game here. It's going to keep Cooper Kupp playing meaningful football throughout the entire game. If Puka were playing, this would be much different ranking. But with Puka out, it's a pretty easy decision to have Cooper Kupp this high, especially with Matthew Stafford. Like, it's shameless the way that he targets Cooper Kupp, and you have to love it for fantasy football.
Okay. All right. Well, I think Amon-Ra bounces back this week. The Rams made a concerted effort to take him away last week. I think overall, a lot of these teams had a lot of time to game plan for these wide receivers in week one, and they were able to do so. But I think with only a week to prepare now, the blow-up games are going to start coming for these high-end wide receivers. Also, the Bucs played too high coverage at the sixth highest rate last week. Amon-Ra absolutely feasted against too high last year. He was 7th in yards per route run against too high. So I'm looking forward to him. I think I understand Jameson Williams is there. He was very involved. I actually have him ranked relatively high in my rankings, maybe over consensus. I actually have no idea, but I would guess I am. But I think he's going to be very involved. I think Jameson's going to be very involved. But I think Amon-Ra is no doubt their one. And in this particular matchup, the way that the Bucs, handle their coverages, I think Amon-Ra is going to have a big game.
Yeah, and not to mention their secondary for the Buccaneers came out of the game against the Commanders really banged up. Antoine Winfield isn't going to play. So even if they have too high back there, you know what I'm saying? It's not going to be Antoine Winfield back there. It's a plus matchup regardless. I think it's going to be high scoring. And again, this is a team that I just talked about with the Buccaneers. I think they're better than a lot of people give them credit for. I think that their offense is going to be able to keep up regardless of what their defense does. So we could see a lot of fantasy points scored in this one. The Lions are going to have their way through the air in almost any matchup just because their offense is that good. But I have no reservations about Amon-Ra St. Brown this week. Obviously, the numbers in terms of utilization don't look fantastic last week, but we know who Amon-Ra St. Brown is. It's not going to be the Jameson Williams show every single week like it was last week. I do think it's going to even out. We'll see Amon-Ra get back to doing sun god things.
I'm really looking forward to seeing how Justin Jefferson does this week. I have him at 6, and this is going to be a more competitive game for San Francisco. With San Francisco, and they're going to have to throw the ball a lot more. So is Sam Darnold going to fold, or is he going to step up to the level of competition, right? Big test for him here. It's going to tell us a lot. So yeah. I'm looking forward to it. Are you expecting Sam Darnold to step up, or what do you think? This is a tough defense.
It's a tough defense, but we watched the Jets get it done for the most part, against the 49ers last week, especially in terms of wide receivers. And Justin Jefferson's very good. I'm not comparing Sam Darnold to Aaron Rodgers at all. But we saw also last season with a backup quarterback, Justin Jefferson, get it done. I think Sam Darnold can go in. He didn't have to throw it a whole lot. Sam Darnold was very efficient against the Giants. He was 12 for 12. But he didn't have to throw it a whole lot last week because the Vikings just went up and absolutely destroyed the Giants. Surprise, surprise. In a negative game script, which I'm expecting in this one, Justin Jefferson is going to be playing a lot more, running a lot more routes. It's going to be a much more pass-first offense. I think that we're going to see a much better game from Justin Jefferson. The volume might be there. So where last week there was a touchdown on not a whole lot of volume, I think it could go the other way. Justin Jefferson could have more volume. I wouldn't count on a touchdown, but if he gets it, I think he's going to have a top 5 type performance because just the way the game script shakes out. I actually have Justin Jefferson at 5. I don't know if you think that's a little bit high. I know you said you have him at 6. I have him at 5 right now, and that's subject to change over the weekend. Obviously that's just the way rankings are. But I think Justin Jefferson at 5 feels right because this matchup could go in a very good direction as far as a negative game script, him running a lot of routes, and he's going to get the targets if he's running a lot of routes.
I'm going to move down my rankings a little bit. I have Rashee Rice at 10 against Cincinnati. Most likely no Hollywood Brown again this week. We saw Rashee continue to get target after target after target, and that was against the Ravens last week, a good defense. And now they're at home against Cincinnati, who, with Mike Hilton as their nickel, gave up the 5th most fantasy points to slot receivers last year. I'm expecting another big game for Rashee after he got 33% of Patrick Mahomes' targets last week. Also, the Bengals played the 2nd most single high coverage last week, and Rice had the 6th highest yards per route run against single high last week.
Yeah. I have Rashee Rice at 10 in my rankings too, believe it or not. We have some parallels here, but Rashee Rice, the way that he earns targets is pretty hilarious. This is Amon-Ra St. Brown type stuff. I know that was your comparison for him pretty much over the entire offseason, and even going into this season, in week 1, we saw that type of target earning opportunity and ability for Rashee Rice. I'm not worried about Xavier Worthy coming in. Even once Hollywood Brown is back, I'm not worried about him. I think we're going to see Rashee Rice. He's going to be one of the values of the draft, the way that he earns targets. He could have that type of upside. I don't want to say Michael Thomas upside, but just the way that he was being used reminded me of Michael Thomas, the way that he's just getting those short yards, taking it and doing what he needed to do. He's going to be a volume-based receiver, and that's perfectly fine in an offense as good as the Chiefs. So I like Rashee Rice at 10. I don't think we're going to see him fall much further than the top 15 as long as he's healthy the rest of the season.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I had Nico at 11. I actually moved him up to 9 this morning. He could see a lot of Jalen Johnson this week, so maybe temper expectations when he's in coverage with him. But at the same time, the Bears ran the ninth most high single coverage last week, and Nico was ranked second in yards per route run against single high last year. I think he was only behind Tyreek Hill. And he also ranked second last week as well against single high. So he'll be in my lineup, obviously. By the way, I have Tank Dell at 18 this week. He was also top 15 in yards per route run against single high last year. So I do have him one spot over Diggs this week, just because last week we saw him being targeted down the field almost as much as Nico. Diggs wasn't really targeted down the field much, but he did get the red zone targets, right? So,
Right.
all these guys are these guys are all in my top 20, which is, it's really hard for all of them to finish in the top 20. But in terms of my rankings, I'm not ranking them based on where they will finish. I'm kind of ranking them based on, where I'm starting them, who I'm starting them over. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And that's one of the things with doing rankings is like a lot of people will look at it and just look at it as like one for one. Like, oh, you had this player XYZ at like wide receiver 36. He was a wide receiver 18 this week. It's like, it's not necessarily, these aren't predictions about where they're going to finish. It's what we're seeing and where they can finish based on what we're seeing. That kind of thing. That's the way I kind of look at it. And I think a lot of people mix that
me
up.
too.
So I'm 100% in agreement with you on that one.
Here's the thing, like, for example, like on Fantasy Pros, right? Like on the expert rankings and stuff, like that's how they calculate, whether you were accurate or not with like where they finished, right?
Relative to their
I don't know,
standing in the week.
That's just not how I do rankings, right? Because I'm ranking them based on, now if I was ranking based on like, if I was just ranking based on projections, then sure. But I'm not. I have other factors that go into it besides just raw projections. You know what I'm saying?
For me, it's like, would I start this player over this player? That's a lot of how I go into it. It's like you have to factor in utilization, all that. But
yes,
I digress.
Exactly.
Obviously.
Exactly. Yeah. Believe it or not, I have Devonta Smith all the way up at 12 this week. I talked about him on the show on Wednesday. But just real quick, like 30% target share, 71% of routes from the slot. He's going up against D. Alford this week. That is a good matchup for him. Okay, he got benched last week. I'm sorry, he got benched last year, late in the year, and that he's a nickel corner again. So perfectly fine. This might be a little high for Devonta Smith, but I love him this year in the slot. And I think the Eagles are going to score a lot of points this week. So yeah, I'm all over him.
Yeah, it's okay to fall in love with that slot role because I'm also in love with the slot role. It's great for him. You know what I'm saying? And the way that the offense played, what we saw last week, that's exactly what we wanted to see. The volume's going to be there. I do think it's a little bit high. I have Devonta Smith a little bit lower in my rankings, although every time we talk about Devonta Smith, it makes me want to move him up. I don't know why.
I know.
Like, I might move it. Right now, I have Stephon Diggs over him. I think I'm going to put Devonta Smith over him. But Malik Neighbors and Devonta Smith, between those two, I was kind of fighting them on that because we know Malik Neighbors is going to have the volume, but the quarterback quality isn't as good. The offense quality isn't as good. Who are you starting between those two?
Between Devontae and
Neighbors.
And I'm starting Devontae.
That's interesting.
I just think the quality of the offense is better.
Yeah.
I love the matchup between Neighbors, obviously. Here's the thing. The one thing that when I was doing these rankings, I'm like, man, I don't know if I should have him this high because I don't know if the game script is going to require Philly to throw it a lot, right? It could be a Saquon game, right, against the Falcons. They're favored by 6.5 points. So I totally understand, this might be a little high. But I do love the matchup. And if this game is relatively close, if the Falcons defense can at least keep them in the game a little bit, maybe they could end up doing some things. But I wasn't in love with the Falcons offense last week at all, and we'll talk about that in a second. So I the more I'm talking about it right now, the more I'm thinking maybe this is a little bit aggressive. I just think that he's a really good player, and I think the role is awesome. But now I'm questioning, will they have to throw the ball a whole lot? They are pass-first offense regardless, right? In neutral situations, they're most likely going to be, a little bit higher on the pass spectrum than run spectrum. But if they're up in this game, they're going to have to score some points before they're up, though.
Right.
That's the thing.
That's the Kellen Moore shining through in the offense, making them pass first. But still, Saquon, what do you have? 30 opportunities last week? It was just insane.
Yeah.
So...
yeah,
I think regardless of how the game script goes, they're going to put up points. You have to get to 30 points somehow for it to be a negative game script or a positive game script, and it could be very well Devonta Smith. So it's going to be a high scoring offense. I don't have a problem with you having him at 12. I just that's way higher than I have him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. The Eagles do have the highest implied total on the week, so they do have to score some points.
Right.
So yeah. Now I have Deebo Samuel one spot above Brandon Ayuk because of the fact CMC is banged up, right? I would usually have Ayuk higher most weeks, but Deebo ended up with 8 carries last week on top of his 32% target share. So there is a lot of opportunity for him in these type of situations, specifically with CMC banged up. Also, the Vikings ran the most 2 high safety looks last week, and Deebo had the 4th highest yards per route run last year against that coverage scheme. So I also actually like his anytime touchdown on Underdog, because when I take a look on Outlier, an app that shows all the trends based on the hires, lowers that are set, it shows that Deebo has scored in 5 straight games on the road and is actually averaging 1.6 touchdowns per game during that span too. So I'm probably going to be adding that to my Underdog Pick'ems entry this week as well. And by the way, if you do end up downloading the Underdog app, use the code UpperHand so you can get the free CeeDee Lamb pick to add to your entry and claim your deposit match offer up to $1,000. When you play Pick'ems, you have a chance to win up to 1,000 times your money. All right. But between Deebo and Ayuk, who do you have higher?
Right now, I have Ayuk because I know last week Ayuk was a little bit limited, and he wasn't making catches like he was. We saw the one in the end zone; he just dropped it. It was a perfectly placed ball from Brock Purdy. I still like Ayuk,
but he was also going up against Sauce, right?
Yes,
like for the most part, like he's a perimeter wide receiver, so DJ Reed and Sauce, like not the best matchup there, right? So there's a lot of things going against Ayuk last week.
Yeah, there was. So for me, I'm going to put him in my lineup again over Deebo Samuel. Obviously, the number of leagues where I have to make a decision between Ayuk and Samuel is very low, because I feel like this is setting yourself up to fail, because you have to make that decision every single week if you have both of them. But if you happen to have both of them, I would still lean Ayuk. But if you have both of them, again, you're probably starting both of them. But for me, Deebo Samuel's usage was great. You mentioned it. He got the carries with CMC out. That makes sense. But so did Jordan Mason. So for me, I and you bring up the stats too, about 1.6 touchdown average on the road. That's great for Deebo Samuel. That's amazing. But I think on a more consistent basis, it's going to be Brandon Ayuk. I have them back to back in my rankings, literally at 12 and 13. So I'm not worried about them at all. But if I had to pick, I think I would go Brandon Ayuk, just because we saw how efficient he was last season. And I think he's going to get back up to speed. The more he plays, the more up to speed he's going to get. People were clowning him for signing the contract and having a pretty quiet performance. But like you mentioned, the matchup was also pretty tough last week too.
Yeah, I also have them back-to-back at 14 and 15 this week. I have Chris Godwin at 17 at Detroit. I really like this new role for him. This might be super aggressive, ranking as well. Like, I'm being aggressive on a lot of my guys, to be honest.
Yeah. It's not as aggressive as Devonta Smith. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, no, I guess. Chris Godwin at 17 I feel like is still aggressive, though. But there are several high-end wide receivers who I don't love this week, so that's why Chris Godwin's this high, as well as, the fact that he had a 28% target share, last week in a new role where we know he's comfortable, right? When the defense has to pay attention to Mike Evans, and with them unable to stop Cooper Kupp last week out of the slot without any real threat on the outside, like, I'm going to be a little aggressive with Godwin this week.
Yeah, and that makes total sense. I would be aggressive with Godwin. I would be aggressive with Mike Evans, too. I have Mike Evans pretty high. I have him at wide receiver 7 because I love this matchup for them. But also, like you mentioned with Chris Godwin, the role that he's playing, you can't ignore it. And the way that the Buccaneers offense looks, it's going to be pass first, that kind of thing. You mentioned the switch to the slot, and he got the volume. And the thing is, I think what was one of your favorite stats over the offseason was it Chris Godwin? He only had 4 fewer targets than Mike Evans was it last year, I think it was. So, like, you refer to that, he's on pace. Obviously, it's only been a week. But if this usage keeps up, he would be on pace to out-target Mike Evans. And obviously, the touchdowns went to Mike Evans last week. But Chris Godwin, he had a touchdown of his own. The Buccaneers' passing offense looks well-oiled already. Baker Mayfield is in control. I love Chris Godwin. I actually have him at 16 right now. I could move him down. So maybe you thought you were aggressive, but maybe I'm hyper-aggressive. But just the way that this Buccaneers passing offense look, it's going to be a good game between the Lions and the Buccaneers. You can't really ask for much better. In these types of games where both teams are going to be putting up points, you're going to have guys that have big games like this. So Chris Godwin, I don't have a problem with that. It's literally Chris Godwin and Mike Evans at the top of the target distribution, and then everybody else. I mean, Rachaad White got some last week, but Jalen McMillan, he had the one catch. That was it. And of course, it was for a touchdown. But this target distribution is exactly how we wanted to see it coming into the season.
So are you starting him over Davante Adams? Davante Adams is going up against Baltimore. Tough matchup, but it's almost like you have to play him, right? Like, I'm just a little worried overall about Gardner Minshew on the road.
Yeah.
In Baltimore.
It's really like slimy saying like I'd like to start Chris Godwin over Davante Adams, but whose matchup is better? It's definitely Chris Godwin, who looked better in terms of their target earning in week 1. And it's not Davante Adams' fault necessarily. You have Gardner Minshew, a quarterback, so that's its own problem in itself. But if I had to pick between who looked better in week 1, it's definitely Chris Godwin. And who am I more confident in right now? Who's going to put up more points? The Raiders put up 10 points against the Chargers defense last week. What is the Ravens defense going to do to them? They're just going to get murdered. So I don't know how much upside there is for Davante Adams this week. You're counting on, I think, 8 or 9 catches for maybe 60, 70 yards. And I don't think that upside is anywhere close to what Chris Godwin can have. Chris Godwin could have a touchdown, 2 touchdowns on 4 or 5 receptions, that kind of thing. The way that this offense is going to play, I think, against the Lions, it's not a bad matchup for the Bucs. I'm starting Chris Godwin over Davante Adams this week. It's very, very slimy saying it, but I have Chris Godwin 2 spots above Davante Adams. I am at 16, Chris Godwin. Davante Adams is at 18.
I actually moved DK Metcalf way up in my rankings this week. I have him at 16. He was matched up with one of the best corners, if not the best corner in the league last week in Patrick Surtain. I will maintain that Sauce is the best. But DK does face Christian Gonzalez this week. Probably another shadow situation. But Gonzalez only had 4 games to his name as a rookie last year. So he's basically playing in his sixth career game this Sunday. Last year, he was allowing almost half a fantasy point per route run against him. That's bad. He was targeted on 32% of the routes run against him last year, which was the highest in the NFL up to that point. I know Jamar Chase didn't have a big game last week, but, Joe Burrow wasn't himself, and the Seahawks have more weapons than the Patriots need to pay attention to, right? And Metcalf, I think he should be in lineups this week. I wouldn't get discouraged from his not-so-great performance in week 1.
Right, and as bad as the Bengals looked on offense last week, I think part of it was the Patriots' defense still just being pretty good. You know what I mean? They're not horrific. I think they can keep the Patriots in the game. Whether Jacoby Brissett can do that, whether Jacoby Brissett and the Patriots' offense, relying completely on Ramondre Stevenson, can keep up with the Seahawks scoring, we're going to find out. But I don't think that this is going to be a game where it's just a completely positive or negative game script for either team. I do like DK Metcalf. We like DK Metcalf coming into the season. I think we're going to see more of the Ryan Grubb effect in the passing game this week as opposed to last week. I think the only way to go is up from last week for the Seahawks wide receivers, because there was nothing going on, and they didn't have to do that because there was next to no pressure from the Broncos offense for them to really air it out, especially when Kenneth Walker was playing as well as he was.
Yeah, agreed. I want to talk about a couple of the disappointments from last week real quick. Chris Olave, Drake London, Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm on alert specifically for London and Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm not overly concerned with Olave given the fact that it was a blowout early. There was 0 neutral game script for them. I think they only had 7 or 8 snaps in a neutral game script in this game. So, in a game where they will definitely have to throw against the Cowboys, I think he bounces back. But between Drake London and the Falcons and then Marvin Harrison Jr. against the Rams, which of those 2 are you more confident in starting this week?
I'm more confident in London here. And let's be clear, neither of these guys got off to a blazing start this season at all. It was just a terrible start for both of them. And London was running a bunch of cardio in week 1. He had 3 targets on 100% route participation, according to Fantasy Life's utilization report. But the Falcons, they were just getting eaten alive by TJ Watt. And it's still a very good Steelers defense, I should say. It's still a very good Steelers defense that they were playing against. The Eagles have talent on defense, but it's not TJ Watt. And even that talented defense yields fantasy points sometimes, like we saw against Packers last week. The Eagles allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers last week. They're allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers last year overall. Like, with no TJ Watt to terrorize Kirk Cousins, I like his odds of finding a rhythm a lot more. It is Kirk Cousins in primetime, though, so we'll have to see what happens. I'm still concerned about the Falcons' offense overall. There are questions that I have now that I didn't have going into week 1 last week. But I'm going to have a little faith here. I'm going to see what Drake London does. He was one of my guys earlier this year. I have him all the way up at 16 this week. He was getting that full route participation. We just need Kirk Cousins to be serviceable. Last week, unfortunately, he looked like Desmond Ridder. But if he can just improve a little bit, be better than Desmond Ridder. In a plus matchup against the Eagles secondary, I think that Drake London can come through this week where he didn't last week. Obviously, sour taste in your mouth right now. Spit it out, and then just roll forward into week 2. I'm confident. I'm starting him as a wide receiver too. I'd rather have Drake London over Davante Adams, given that the matchup and the quarterback situation there. So I don't know how you feel. I know you have him pretty low in your rankings this week, but I'm giving Drake London a little bit of grace here.
Yeah, I love Drake London, but I have him at 29 this week, and that's really low.
That is,
obviously, compared to where I had him in week 1. But the things that are concerning for me, I think you mentioned the 100% route participation. Like, that is awesome, right? Like, the utilization for, that these coaches are dialing up, that's exactly what we want to see, right? And that's not something that Arthur Smith had him at like 80% route participation, which made no sense. And now with George Pickens was under 80%, this past week, and that makes no sense either. And now George Pickens goes against Patrick Surtain, and it's not great. Anyway, I digress. With Drake London, my issue isn't with Drake London, it's more so with Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins was a statue. He was already a statue quarterback, but he was even more of a statue, and it looks like it's because of the Achilles injury. He couldn't move around at all. There was zero play action. There was zero snaps from under center. So this offense is limited. It's just limited right now. There isn't much variety that they could really do until Kirk Cousins gets right. So they're kind of, Drake London's kind of pigeonholed into making sure that he could win, short, intermediate, that sort of thing. And the Eagles didn't apply too much pressure last week, right? So there is the chance that Kirk Cousins can, be better than last week. But I just don't see the upside for Drake London. So until I see Kirk Cousins a little bit more comfortable, he did not look good in week 1. That's kind of where, that's kind of why I have Drake London so low in my rankings this week.
Right. It's hard to make money as a statue quarterback when you're being chased by TJ Watt. And that's all I'm saying. Like, TJ Watt absolutely wrecked the game. And the Eagles don't have that type of presence on the defensive line. They have talent on defense, don't get me wrong. But I don't think there's a game wrecker on that defense like last week. And I think if Kirk Cousins can just get into a rhythm, some kind of rhythm, even if they're playing from behind, that's going to be good news. I think that the upside is there. I know you're worried about no motion, no play action, that kind of thing. I think that Drake London can overcome that this week just because the matchup is very good. The Packers. Yeah, the Packers were able to take advantage of the Eagles last week. I think that the Falcons can do the same. You just have to get Kirk Cousins rolling. So I'm giving them, like I said, just a little bit of a cushion right here. I'm not just going to panic right off the bat.
I have Jameson Williams at 26. I really loved how the Lions used him last week. A variety of routes, clearly involving him, clearly a focal point for the offense. 30% target share, 94% route participation, which is huge for him. 65% of the air yards. He has every chance of being a stud fantasy wide receiver. Do you have him this high, or like how cool are you with starting Jameson Williams this week?
I have him a little bit lower. I have him at wide receiver 28, which isn't that much lower.
Okay.
Yeah, he's going against Tampa Bay. Again, this matchup is fantastic. And he put himself on the map last week, which he never did in his career. But he put himself on the map because he had the utilization and he got the targets. When you out-target Amon-Ra St. Brown, that's something to definitely pay attention to. I'm not saying it's going to happen every week, but he took the next step to being a startable fantasy wide receiver. If he does that again 2 or 3 times in these next 3 or 4 weeks, like, we're talking about someone that could be in lineups every single week moving forward.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I wanted to quickly go back to Marvin Harrison Jr. I think a couple of the concerns that I had with Marvin Harrison Jr. was that, number one, like, he needs to just, there were some concerns about him running slow, right? And that's what it looks like on tape. And I think that was true. I'm not overly concerned with it, though, because this is just not who he is. He's not like this burner. He's more technique and that sort of thing. But he's like running these clearing routes, right? Instead of running layup routes, which that's where he can actually get targeted right now, right? So hopefully they get that fixed and allow him to run more underneath so he can get more involved. So if they do that, I think he'll be fine. But, did not like the usage and how he looked in week 1, the kind of combination of the two. He's a rookie, so there's time there, but this is kind of why I wasn't excited to draft him so early. I was hoping that they would come in and have a real plan for him, but it didn't seem to be the case. Right. So a little bit concerning there. Hopefully they get to fix that a little bit. Maybe, it's not really a squeaky wheel situation, but the media kind of brought it up, right? Kyler had to talk about it. Marvin Harrison had to talk about it. We'll see if Drew Petzing will dial something up for Marvin Harrison this week.
That's terrible when they do that, especially for a rookie in their first game. Like, how many times we see rookies have bad games in their first game? Like, that's just how it goes. So I didn't appreciate it that much that became the storyline, that maybe he wasn't running his routes at full speed, that kind of thing. Like, just give him time. It was a tough game when Greg Dortch was getting it done, apparently. You know what I'm saying? He was on the field. He's getting the targets. And you're also competing with Trey McBride, who Kyler Murray has shown an affinity for. He was Kyler Murray's favorite target. Trey McBride was last season when they were both on the field. So I'm not just going to write that off. Definitely worried because he only had, the 4 targets? He had the 1 catch. Not a whole lot of targets, but he's still running the full route participation. I think it'll come in time. We'll see what happens. And this is a matchup where I think he can get it done. Like I mentioned, the Cardinals might be playing either catch up or they might be playing a competitive game. I don't think there's a situation where Marvin Harrison has to be off the field for any reason unless he would get hurt. And we don't want that, obviously. And I'm not projecting that.
I have 3 rookies back-to-back in my rankings. Xavier Worthy at 32, Ladd McConkey at 33, and then Brian Thomas Jr. at 34. I think Brian Thomas has the most upside, even though they're going up against the Browns. Tough defense, obviously. But the Browns did run the most single high coverage last week. If they do the same, there's a chance he can potentially get up right over the top of the defense and score. But we'll see, right? Kind of a boom-bust play for me, but I do like the upside. And Xavier Worthy, he's on a great offense, right? There's no Hollywood Brown. He got close to a full route participation last week, but, he didn't get the targets. But he was used in a way where he could be efficient, right? We could see something like that again this week potentially. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm kind of trusting the Chiefs' offense here. You know what I'm saying? That's what you have to kind of rely on with Xavier Worthy, and that's perfectly fine when you saw what he did last week. He doesn't need the bunch of targets and bunch of touches that you usually need for a wide receiver. We know that he's talented. He's going to be able to produce. I have him at 34. I actually have McConkey at 32 ahead of him because he got the targets. I know he wasn't running a full route participation, but neither was Xavier Worthy, but they also have a good matchup, the Chargers do, against the Panthers this week. And I think that they can get it done. So I like McConkey. I think his floor is a little bit safer with a little bit of upside to go with it. So I have McConkey at 32, Xavier Worthy at 34. And I believe I have Brian Thomas. I think he's a little bit lower than both of them. Let me see. So he's at 35. He's right behind Xavier Worthy. And that's just solely based on the matchup being difficult. We saw the Browns give the Cowboys wide receivers fits. I know Brian Thomas, like you mentioned, he has that touchdown upside. I think the upside's absolutely there. But the Jaguars offense also didn't look fantastic. So I have them at 35. But all of these guys can be in lineups. I think all of them are nice flexes. But my favorite is probably McConkey just this week. Most of the time it's going to be Worthy.
I can get behind that. I would prefer to have McConkey above them all than have Brian Thomas above them all.
Yeah.
So I agree with you there. I don't think I really want to start Jayden Reed this week, man. With Malik Willis starting. Like, what do you think? Like, I have him all the way down at 38 this week. That might be really low. But I just don't trust this offense at all with Malik Willis.
Yeah, I have him way down too. I have him at wide receiver 40. So that might be disingenuous. And that's nothing against his talent. That's nothing against what we saw last week. He looked great last week. But I don't know with Malik Willis, like you mentioned, how much are they going to be able to take advantage of other team secondaries? It's not that I don't trust Malik Willis as a player. Like, he's an NFL player. He's in the NFL for a reason. And obviously, the Packers have some sort of faith in him because they went out and got him. Yeah, they went out and got him. And I'm going to default to my favorite stat right here. He hasn't thrown for 100 yards in a game in his career. So for me, I'm not worried about I'm not worried about starting Malik Willis. I don't think that there's going to be any reason to. And then Jayden Reed also. I think the Packers receivers are going to have a tough time as long as Jordan Love is out.
I'm just low on this offense overall. They have a 4th lowest implied total, I think, for the week. So not in on it at all.
The ceiling just crashed. It's terrible.
Yeah, pretty much. I have George Pickens pretty low. He'll be shadowed by Patrick Surtain, so I'm kind of out on him this week. I have the 2 Rams receivers, Tyler Johnson and Demarcus Robinson, in the 50s this week. They're nothing more than flex plays if you're pretty desperate. I lean Tyler Johnson by a hair over Robinson, mostly because he was targeted at a higher rate than Robinson once he entered the game. And there's a better chance that he's doing more of Puka things and routes like Puka does than Demarcus Robinson. Okay, so, but that's going to do it, guys. If you want the rest of the rankings, upperhandfantasy.com. But we'll see you guys soon. Take it easy. Peace.